Hello and welcome to the final whistle. I'm Steve Forbes.
And I'm Kenzie Benali.
Well, it was a game of limited chances, shall we say. Kenzie at Villa Park as Southampton run out 1-0 losers away to Aston Villa tonight. Now here to discuss all the stuff from the game, we have Premier League reporter Paul Belveston and former Southampton captain Dean Hammond. Paul, we'll come to you first. General thoughts?
Wasn't great, was it? It was difficult to watch. It never really clicked. There was a lot of sloppy passing in there. Again, sort of punished for a mistake or maybe two or three in there. And I think it's one of those where when you do completely transform a squad in one summer with a dozen players leaving, a dozen coming in, of course there are going to be difficult moments. Things aren't going to be seamless when there's such a big transition in players in and out and that sort of thing. And it's just so confusing watching a performance like that, though, when you've seen everyone play so well and work together as a team, and in particularly the recent home games. I know it's very different when you go away from home, but yeah, frustrating night. And yeah, difficult to watch and pick much out of it, really.
Yeah, Dean, do you feel the same? As Paul mentioned, there are quite a number of new faces and different players who we saw in the opening game of the season against Spurs, and we're only, 6 match days in now?
Yes, yeah, definitely. Sometimes things can take time, and I think the performance tonight just was evident of that. I think it was just a poor Premier League game, really, from both teams. I don't think Aston Villa or Southampton really deserved to win the game. There was a lack of quality, probably from both sides. And just, I thought Southampton lacked a little bit of energy tonight, if I'm honest. And were just, like Paul mentioned, just a little bit sloppy and couldn't quite get themselves going in terms of possession. It felt a little bit hesitant, a little bit negative at times. I think there was chances to play forward a little bit quicker and a little bit earlier, and players just kind of hesitated and end up playing backwards. Not many chances created. But also, if you break it down and look at it, if Aston Villa don't score just before the end of the first half, you could say Southampton would be reasonably happy going into half-time at 0-0, where they frustrated Aston Villa, and then maybe can come out in the second half, make some substitution, make some changes, which we've seen Ralph do early on in the season to try and change the game. And that looked potentially like it was the game plan, to try and frustrate Aston Villa, and then come on strong later in the game. But that didn't happen either. Even the substitutions didn't really make the impact. And I mentioned it before the game. I think Southampton lacked a deep line midfield player, just kind of knit it all together tonight to get that first pass off, to play that forward pass, to get the creative players on the half turn, to be able to get the ball wide, to allow to get the fullbacks higher up the pitch. It seemed as though the distances between the players were too big, so that there wasn't any chance for any combination or creative play in Aston Villa's half. So I think a night of frustration and disappointment, really, because I think that's two games in a row now, really, where Southampton shouldn't have lost. Probably haven't deserved to win either against Wolves and tonight, but shouldn't have lost. And that's probably 2 points dropped over the two games and I think that will be the disappointment.
All right, well, let's try and pick apart the match in a bit more detail now. Belvers, for 40 minutes, the game was pretty even, wasn't it? Then Jacob Ramsey gave Villa the lead. They really took the game then to Southampton for a few minutes, and they were under the cosh, the Saints, towards the end of that first half.
Yeah, hadn't really been troubled before that, and then it was that blooming Philippe Coutinho who just had a few minutes, didn't he? And he spun James Ward-Prowse and shot just over the bar, and then he found himself free at the back post, had a header that Bazunu saved that led to the corner the second corner that then caused the goal. And in that build-up, that's sort of one of the mistakes I was referring to. Moussa Djenepo, who's been playing as a fullback for a fair chunk of this season, he just switched off. He let Coutinho drift around the back. And one sort of positive was seeing another positive of Bella Kotchap, he really berated Gineppo for that. And when you think he's only 20 years old, he's only played 5 or 6 games, taking on a more senior player like that, pointing out, come on, that's not good enough. That was good to see. Ultimately, seconds later, they were behind. I feel for the goalkeeper, because I imagine his initial reaction was, oh, I've done well there. I've got a good hand on that. But if he'd got a lesser contact, the ball probably would have gone over the bar. Instead, it just ballooned up, hit the bar, and then it was a bit of a scramble. Saints couldn't clear properly, and Ramsey slotted it in. I've got to be honest, I thought when I saw that he was in an offside position initially, I would big grin, happy days, VAR will rule this out. But one of the intricacies of the offside law, we've talked about it many times, that it's not as straightforward as it perhaps was in the past. And in fairness to VAR, they made their decision very quickly for once. I think I wouldn't be surprised to hear Ralph Hasenhüttl complain a bit about that, but ultimately, from what the officials seem to be saying and everything, that it was right to stand. And you're right, they Villa then pushed on ahead of half time. Coutinho again, you feared in first half injury time that he might just ping that free kick into the top corner. Thankfully he didn't, but having had the chance to get everyone together in half time, nothing really kicked on from there, unfortunately. So yeah, it was a disappointing end to the first half, and things didn't get much better in the second.
Dean, what would you think would have been said in the Southampton dressing room at half-time? Because Villa didn't really create too much up until that final 5 minutes of the first period.
I think up until the final 5 minutes, Steve, I think the manager would have been reasonably pleased, because coming in at 0-0 would have looked like it was the game plan and the mentality from the players, just to frustrate Aston Villa. But then I think that would have turned to frustration, just like Paul touched on there. A lack of concentration, some individual errors led to a goal that didn't need to happen, really. Gineppo switching off. I actually think Bella Kotchap can actually be a little bit more aggressive and win the header. I think he needs to do that, to be honest. And then they just don't react to the second phase of the goal. But then at half time, you switch to the fact that, okay, what can we do better? What can we try and do to get back in the game and try and win this game, which Southampton have been very good at this season. That's been one of the positive. They've reacted very well to disappointment and been able to work their way back into the game. So it would have been be braver in possession, move the ball a little bit quicker, move for each other off the ball. I think we saw that at times the players were actually willing and demanding it off each other to move for each other. And it just didn't quite click tonight for some reason. Like I say, the combinations weren't there, but just a little bit more urgency and a bit more energy from the players, because I really think if Southampton could have performed anywhere near what they have done this season, they could have won the game tonight. And it would have been disappointment at half-time that Southampton didn't really create much, hadn't had many shots on goal. And then towards the end of the game, again, second half, didn't really take the game to Aston Villa, who were not at their best either. So disappointment and frustration, but then just trying to get the players to do a little bit more for each other and collectively, I think would have been the message at half-time.
Belvers, Dean saying there that something didn't quite click tonight. Ralph tried 5 changes in the second half, but no clear-cut opportunities. Specifically, what didn't quite click in the final third for Southampton this evening?
I think Dean sort of said it in his first answer that, take a step back from that final third. It was in the middle of the park that things really didn't click for Southampton. I think there was a lot of sloppy passing. They always seemed to be just a little bit too short or a little bit too wide. The passing wasn't crisp and snappy and into players' strides for them to run onto. James Ward-Prowse had an unusually poor game by his very high standards. I think the pessimist in me says it's a worry that Saints seem so reliant already on an 18-year-old midfielder in Romeo Lavia, who's not played in the division before, but that's the situation we seem to be in. It would be an ideal situation would be to have Romeo and Romeo as your options in the number 6 role, but of course Oriol was allowed to go back to Spain on deadline day for emotional reasons, as more than anything else, by all accounts. But it didn't really work with the captain and Joe Aribo in the center of the park there. And if you're not grabbing control of the middle of the park, you're not going to be able to get the ball into your front players and allow them to create stuff. There did seem to be a huge lack of creativity. And when the flair players came off the bench, or the creative players as well, they still weren't really getting the ball in positions where they could do much about hurting Aston Villa. So it's just an off day. Hopefully, it's not a sign of things to come, because we've said it already that there've been plenty of other much better performances from these very same players already this season. I think we just got to get used to a bit of inconsistency and accept that, because the average age of this squad is so low. These players, all young players, are going to struggle with performing at their very highest level week in, week out. But as well as the young players, it's certainly not just pointing the finger at the teenagers and the 20-year-olds, because there was some more experienced players there who again had off nights. I've mentioned Prowsey, Shea Adams, Adam Armstrong. They just never got to grips with the game. So yeah, hopefully this is one that we can just say, okay, move on, forget that. Let's not ever worry about a trip to Villa Park again, at least for another year, because the last two have been horrible.
Dean, what did you make of the changes that Ralph made? Because we got comments on social media before the game about how good the bench looked, but those players that did come on found it tricky to actually break Villa down.
They did, and basically what Paul just said there was just it just didn't quite click tonight. And I agree. I think it's a one-off. It's definitely a one-off, because the players that have proved already this season that they're very, very capable and have performed to a high level. So it was the manager changed shape a little bit, went kind of a more traditional 4-3-3. And then went to a 4-4-2 almost through that second half to try and change something, change the personnel. Aribo coming on, Larius at left back actually did okay, had a couple of moments where he drove forward with the ball and looked reasonably exciting, and that looks like that's one of his qualities from left back. Stuart Armstrong came on, tried to make things happen, but Stuart's brilliant when he's got players close to him and around him, and he can have those passes, those quick passes, 1 and 2 touch passes, combined with people. And it almost seemed as though, it's a strange thing to say, the pitch was too big. Everyone was spread out. They weren't playing with each other. Every player seemed a little bit isolated, and that happened with the players coming on. Mario, when he was up front, was isolated. So when he held the ball up, he didn't have people running past him. So it was very easy for Aston Villa to defend tonight. They could just stay in their slots, stay in their position. They weren't moved around. It was difficult for the players coming onto the pitch to really make an impact or change it, really. And it was quite comfortable for Aston Villa towards the end, which is unfortunate. But it's a one-off, and this will happen. Just that inconsistency from such a young team, but you'll learn from this. I'm sure they'll react to it and look forward to the next game.
Absolutely, and they'll have some time to wait for that next game, because it is indeed an international break up next, which of course gives us the opportunity to reflect on the season so far. Belvis, 7 games gone, 7 points on the board. How do you assess that opening part of the season for Southampton?
Well, I think they certainly you could sort of put a little line after the first 150 minutes of the season, if you like, something like that, when the system was 3 at the back, heavy defeat at Tottenham, very poor first hour against Leeds, and then reverted to the more traditional Ralph Hasenhüttl formation of 4 at the back, and perhaps a tweak on his most favoured 4-2-2-2, and things suddenly looked an awful lot brighter. And there have been many positives. We've mentioned many times already this evening about the potential and the talent, the quality, the way so many of these young players have started, the new signings, the fact that it is exciting looking at the squad, looking at the different options that are there, and considering and thinking about what might be coming as they get more settled in and more used to playing together. I think after the high of Chelsea, I made the mistake of looking at the next three games of Wolves, Aston Villa, and Everton, thinking that looks a very nice little run of games, and perhaps we could see Southampton pushing up high. I think realistically, after such changes in the squad, a point a game isn't the biggest disaster by any means. Southampton have had far worse starts than 7 points from 7 games in recent and many Premier League seasons of the past. So, there's absolutely no reason to panic or worry too much. I think there's an awful lot of learning to be done as far as, how these players are best going to gel together. Mistakes are going to be made, but you'd like to think that as the season goes on, they will become less frequent. At the moment, they seem to be getting punished for those mistakes. And perhaps there are one or two things that the manager has to improve on and work on as well. And again, that's only going to come with more time with these players, learning about the players and coming up with ideas of how to get more chances in games, because there was only the one shot on target, I think, tonight, and that was never going to go across the line, let alone trouble the goalkeeper, a header from Sekou Mara. So there's a lot to do, but there's still a lot of reason to be optimistic about this season, and especially when you consider only a month ago the club was being written off. There were all sorts of horrible stories out there about what a doom-laden 9 months we had in store at St Mary's. So things look an awful lot brighter than they might have done. Of course, it all feels a bit low at the moment after that miserable game, but I think we're going to have many more highlights this season. Far more, they'll outweigh the performances and the spectacles that we had this evening.
Yeah, that is a very good point, because although it has been a couple of frustrating results, out of the 7 games so far, there is a lot of positives to take from that, Dean. But what are you looking forward to from the next bunch of games before we go into that World Cup break?
If you take away the game tonight, Steve, to continue the form, I think the performances have been really, really impressive, and the way the players have responded when they have gone a goal down and played that exciting attacking football to try and win games. So continue that, really, because I think that theme and that approach is the best for Southampton. And it's the Southampton we enjoy watching. And the fixtures coming up, I think there's 7 or 8 fixtures now before we have the break before the World Cup. The next game against Everton is really, really important, and a game that you think Southampton can definitely win that game. They really, really can. And then you've got games against Man City, West Ham, Bournemouth, Arsenal, Palace, Newcastle, Liverpool. So fixtures that you get really excited about as a player, as a fan, and I'm sure the players will now. They get a couple of weeks break with the international break coming up, some time for the manager to work with players that are not on international duty in terms of physical condition. Having the chance to sit down and talk to players and demonstrate and explain to them exactly what he wants from them. The new players that have come in, and show them this is what we expect at Southampton. This is the way we play, and embed them a little bit more. So that will be a good thing. But I think Bells is right. We're about right, Steve. 7 points from 7 games. You could say maybe would expect 2 more points from the last 2 games, but did we expect to beat Chelsea? No. And what a brilliant performance that was. So we have to take the positives from that. And I think this will still be a very, very good season, a frustrating night, but it's going to happen with such a young team. But when they're at it and they're on it, they're really good to watch. And I'm looking forward to that in the next 7 or 8 fixtures before the break.
Yeah, as are we, Dean, and it's still very early days, isn't it, as well? But let's, before we say farewell, look ahead to that Everton game then, shall we? Belvis, what are your early thoughts on that one?
I think where this season is very, very positive as well. I think there's a real sort of feeling of positivity around home games at St Mary's as well, which there perhaps hasn't been very regularly over the past probably 5 years, really, when you think, we've had a long period in the middle of that where fans simply weren't allowed to come into stadiums. But, the last 20 minutes against Leeds, fantastic. The way they caused Man United so many problems and were unlucky to come away with that game and nothing. And then that Chelsea game, fantastic fight back, wonderful result. I think you want your fans to be really relishing, really looking forward to going to the home ground. The atmosphere in the first 3 games has been tremendous. There've been wonderful performances all over the park, but particularly as a team together, they've really seemed to click at home in this short sort of only 3 game span sort of thing. But you couldn't ask for a great deal more after, like I said, after the first hour or so against Leeds. It looks really promising at home, and the next game is at home against Everton, an Everton team that will be coming there under pressure regardless of what happens. They are playing this weekend, aren't they? That's not one of the games that's been called off. So Frank Lampard is a manager there that's still trying to find his way at that club. They've got a lot of players there's an awful lot of pressure on Everton because they're building this fantastic new stadium, and they seem to be, last season they only just escaped relegation at the end of the season. They're in trouble again at the start of this season. There are an awful lot of question marks and pressure hanging over that club at the moment, and I think an electric start again at St Mary's, and all of today's disappointment will be forgotten in an instant. There'll be just a lot of optimism, a lot of positivity, a lot of noise as well, and a lot to be excited about on the pitch against Everton.
Dean, Paul talks about the pressure against Everton. They are down in 17th, winless before this weekend's fixtures, and are one of the lowest scoring teams in the division as well. So will Southampton be relishing that match?
I think so, Steve. Everton are a big club, a big name, but they've had problems and challenges well, especially last season and at the beginning of this season. They're not scoring many goals. They're not a huge threat, even though they still do have quality within the group. But there's an expectation on Everton. So Southampton, play with that intensity, play with that belief at home. They put some brilliant performances at home. Bring that energy back to the performance. Start very, very fast. Get the crowd on side. Get St Mary's noisy like it has been, and take Everton on, and play with that freedom that we love to see, and that energy and that pace and that bravery. They can really cause Everton some problems, because defensively Everton are okay, but attacking wise, not a huge threat. So you can afford to be a little bit braver. You can afford to try and play in their half and press them and put them under pressure. So looking forward to that, and that would be my approach towards Everton.
Well, Dean Belvers, always a joy to have you with us on the show. Thanks ever so much for your company. Have a wonderful couple of weeks, and thank you for joining us as always here on Saints Live. As we've mentioned, we'll be back on the 1st of October when we take on Everton at St Mary's Stadium. That's a 3 o'clock kickoff, so we'll be live from 1:45. Join us then.
See you later.